Imagine this: a scattered tribe of nomads, once dismissed as mere horsemen, rises to dominate the world. In just a few decades, they carve out an empire spanning 10 million square miles, twice the size of Rome's, and nearly 10 times Napoleon's. But they didn't just conquer land, they rewrote history itself. Genghis Khan may have ignited the fire, but his descendants carried the torch, toppling empires, reshaping civilizations, and altering the course of humanity forever. Their legacy? It flows through the blood of millions. Genetic studies suggest that around 16 million men today, 1 in every 200, carry Genghis Khan's Y chromosome. And that doesn't even count the countless maternal descendants spread across continents. But how did a people born on the unforgiving Mongolian steppe rise to dominate half the known world? How did they forge the most unstoppable war machine in history? And how does their influence still shape our world nearly 800 years later? Buckle up, because this is the mind-blowing story of Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire. Before he was Genghis Khan, he was just Temujin, a boy born in 1162 in the harsh, windswept Mongolian steppe. His father, Yesugei, was a minor chieftain, but power meant nothing on the steppe unless you could hold on to it. When Temujin was just 9 years old, his father was poisoned by enemies, and his entire family was cast out by their own tribe. His mother, Hoelun, was left alone with her children, forced to survive on wild roots and rodents. Temujin had nothing. No allies, no wealth, no future. Just hunger, rage, and the will to survive. But here's where he was different. Most Mongol clans relied on family bloodlines for power. But Temujin built his own path. Instead of depending on tribal nobility, he rewarded loyalty and talent, no matter where it came from. His closest allies weren't just relatives, they were warriors who proved themselves in battle. And then, he started winning. By his late teens, Temujin had already defied Mongol traditions by forming his own band of loyal followers. He took revenge on the clan that abandoned him, defeating them in battle. He then allied himself with Tokhrul, leader of the powerful Karyat tribe, gaining political and military support. By his 20s, he had a reputation as a skilled warrior and an even more ruthless strategist. But his real rise to power began in 1186, when he declared himself leader of the Mongols. The problem? The Mongols weren't one unified people. They were dozens of warring tribes, each with their own leaders, and they didn't like taking orders. In 1201, a rival warlord named Jamuka, once Temujin's childhood friend, turned into his deadliest enemy. Their armies clashed in a brutal battle, and though Temujin lost that time, his men refused to abandon him. Even in defeat, his rule-by-merit philosophy was changing the Mongols from within. Then, in 1206, after nearly 2 decades of warfare, he did the impossible. He united the Mongols under one banner. The once fractured tribes declared him Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. And that's when the world started to panic. By the time Genghis Khan united the Mongols in 1206, he had already proven himself as a military genius. But uniting the tribes was just the beginning. The Mongols were warriors by nature, and now, under a single banner, they needed something bigger, a world to conquer. His first target was China. The Mongols had long raided the northern borderlands of the Jin dynasty, but this time, Genghis wasn't just looking for loot. He wanted to bring China to its knees. In 1211, he led his first major invasion, shattering the Jin armies in battle after battle. The Mongols weren't just fast, they fought in ways the Chinese had never seen before. They struck hard, retreated into the open steppe, then struck again when the enemy least expected it. By 1215, they had besieged and sacked Zhongdu, modern Beijing, forcing the Jin emperor to flee south. But even as the war in China continued, Genghis Khan's attention was drawn westward, to the Khwarezmian Empire, a vast and wealthy Persian kingdom spanning from modern-day Iran to Central Asia. Initially, he had no intention of war. In 1218, he sent a peaceful caravan of Mongol merchants to establish trade. But the arrogant Shah of Khwarezm, Ala ad-Din Muhammad, saw the Mongols as nothing more than barbarian upstarts. He seized the merchants, executed them, and refused to apologize. It was a mistake of catastrophic proportions. Genghis Khan responded not with diplomacy, but with an unstoppable war machine. In 1219, he launched one of the most devastating invasions in history. The Mongols stormed across Central Asia, obliterating entire cities. Bukhara fell. Samarkand was burned to the ground. The Khwarezmian capital crumbled under Mongol fire. The Shah fled in terror, but there was nowhere to hide. The Mongols hunted him down to a remote island in the Caspian Sea, where he died in exile. The Persian world had never seen destruction on this scale. The once mighty Khwarezmian Empire was erased from history, and Genghis Khan now controlled a territory stretching from the Pacific to the Caspian. But he wasn't done. His armies kept pushing west, toward the gates of Europe. The world had never seen an empire grow this fast, and for those who still thought they could resist, the Mongols had a lesson to teach. By the 1220s, Genghis Khan's empire stretched across Asia, but his ambitions didn't stop there. His next move would send shockwaves through Europe itself. The Mongols had already crushed the Khwarezmian Empire, but they didn't just stop after winning battles, they pursued enemies to the very edges of the known world. As Genghis's generals pushed further west, they encountered the Kingdom of Georgia and the Kievan Rus, a collection of Eastern Slavic states, including modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. At first, the Europeans dismissed the Mongols as just another band of steppe raiders. They had no idea what was coming. In 1223, a Mongol force led by Subutai and Jibe, two of Genghis Khan's most brilliant generals, clashed with a coalition of Russian and Cuman warriors at the Battle of the Khalkha River. The result? A total massacre. The Mongols tricked the Russians into overextending, then surrounded and annihilated them. Thousands were slaughtered. The Mongols even executed the captured Russian princes by crushing them alive beneath wooden planks as they feasted on top. And then, the Mongols vanished. For nearly 2 decades, Europe had no idea what had just hit them. They didn't know that the Mongols weren't done. They were simply waiting, watching, preparing. Because when they returned, they would come as more than just invaders. By then, Genghis Khan had died and his empire had been divided among his sons. The Mongols were no longer a single force. They were multiple khanates, each expanding in different directions. The Golden Horde would become the terror of Russia and Eastern Europe. The Ilkhanate would rule over Persia and the Middle East. The Chagatai Khanate would control Central Asia, while the Yuan dynasty, under Kublai Khan, would take all of China. But no matter how far they spread, they still carried the same brutal efficiency that had made them unstoppable. And soon, Europe would experience their full wrath. Because when the Mongols came back, no kingdom would be safe. In 1236, Europe's brief moment of ignorance ended. The Mongols returned, not as raiders, but as an unstoppable force. And this time, they weren't just probing the edges of civilization. They came to conquer. At the head of this new wave was Batu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, commanding the fearsome Golden Horde. His target? The Kievan Rus, the fractured principalities of modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The Mongols moved like a storm, striking with speed, precision, and brutality. In 1237, they obliterated the city of Ryazan. No mercy, no survivors. From there, they carved a path of destruction through Vladimir, Suzdal, and finally Kiev in 1240. The once proud city, the heart of the Eastern Slavic world, was reduced to rubble. Chroniclers wrote that the Mongols slaughtered so many that the streets were filled with bodies, and the Dnieper River ran red with blood. But they didn't stop there. In 1241, Batu Khan's forces pushed westward into Poland and Hungary. At the Battle of Legnica, they crushed a combined European force led by Polish, German, and Templar knights. Days later, at the Battle of Mohi, they annihilated the Hungarian army, killing thousands, including the country's nobility. Panic spread. The Mongols were at the gates of Europe, unstoppable and merciless. The Pope called for a crusade. Kings and emperors scrambled to prepare defenses. It seemed inevitable that the Mongols would reach the heart of the continent, Vienna, Italy, even France. And then, they stopped. In 1242, just as the Mongols stood on the edge of Western Europe, ready to strike, Batu Khan abruptly pulled back. The reason? The great Khan, Ogedei, Genghis Khan's successor, had died. Batu and the other Mongol princes had to return to Mongolia to elect a new ruler. Europe had been seconds from annihilation, spared only by a twist of fate. But the Mongols weren't gone forever. Their empire still loomed over the world, and their bloodline, Genghis Khan's bloodline, continued to shape history in ways no one could have imagined. And as for Europe, the scars left by the Mongols would never fade. Genghis Khan built the greatest land empire the world had ever seen, but even he couldn't live forever. In 1227, he died, likely from injuries sustained in battle or a fall from his horse. His death, however, didn't slow the Mongol war machine. If anything, it made the Mongols even more dangerous. His empire was too vast for one man to rule alone, so it was divided among his sons into 4 massive khanates: the Golden Horde, Russia, Eastern Europe; the Chagatai Khanate, Central Asia; the Ilkhanate, Persia, the Middle East; the Yuan dynasty, China, ruled by Kublai Khan. Each khanate was ruled by a different branch of Genghis's bloodline, but ultimate power still rested with the Great Khan in Mongolia. For a while, things ran like a well-oiled war machine. Under Ogedei Khan, Genghis's third son and chosen successor, the Mongols continued their conquests, crushing the Jin dynasty in China, devastating Russia, and invading Europe. But then, everything changed. When Ogedei died in 1241, a brutal power struggle erupted. The Mongols had never fought over land before, only over who had the right to rule. And now, Genghis's descendants, all raised to be warriors, turned their ambition against each other. Batu Khan, ruler of the Golden Horde, wanted power. So did Guyuk Khan, Ogedei's son. And behind them, powerful Mongol queens, yes, queens, were pulling the strings. Genghis Khan's daughters-in-law and granddaughters played a massive role in the empire's politics, acting as regents, diplomats, and kingmakers. In 1251, Mongke Khan, another of Genghis's grandsons, took control. He continued the Mongol expansion, launching devastating campaigns into Persia and China. But after his sudden death in 1259, the empire reached a breaking point. His 2 brothers, Kublai and Arik Boke, went to war over who would be the next great Khan. The result? A civil war that shattered Mongol unity. Kublai won and established the Yuan dynasty in China, but by then, the Mongol Empire was no longer a single, unified force. The Khanates drifted apart, each following its own path. The Mongols were still powerful, but the age of unstoppable conquest was over. And yet, Genghis Khan's bloodline remained. His descendants still ruled vast lands, influencing the course of history in ways no one could have predicted. The question now was, what would they become? Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, wasn't just a conqueror, he was a ruler. While previous Mongols had plundered, he wanted to govern. And his greatest prize? China. By the 1260s, Kublai controlled northern China, but the Song dynasty in the south stood firm. Unlike past enemies, the Song were wealthy, well-organized, and had strong defenses. But Kublai was patient. Instead of destroying China, he studied it, learning its governance and adapting Mongol rule to Chinese traditions. In 1271, he declared himself Emperor of China, founding the Yuan dynasty, the first time China was ruled by foreigners. By 1279, the Song were crushed, and China was fully under Mongol control. Kublai ruled differently. He embraced Chinese culture, expanded trade, and welcomed foreigners, most famously Marco Polo, who marveled at his wealth and power. But the Mongols, once fierce warriors, were growing soft, indulging in luxury instead of war. Kublai had built an empire unlike any Mongol before him, but had he also planted the seeds of its downfall? Kublai Khan ruled the biggest empire on Earth, but even the greatest empires don't last forever. As Mongol rulers settled into luxury, they lost their warrior edge. Corruption spread. Rebellions flared. In China, heavy taxation and failed military campaigns, like the disastrous invasions of Japan and Vietnam, weakened Mongol rule. By 1368, the Yuan dynasty collapsed, and the Mongols were driven out. Meanwhile, in the West, the Golden Horde, the Mongol faction ruling Russia, fractured into warring states. In Persia and the Middle East, Mongol rule crumbled as local leaders reclaimed power. The once unbreakable empire was now a collection of rival khanates, each fighting for survival. The Mongols had changed the world, but now the world was changing without them. Genghis Khan wasn't just a conqueror, he was a visionary ruler. Unlike most medieval warlords, he built an empire that thrived on religious freedom, trade, and strict but fair laws. His Silk Road reforms transformed it into history's most efficient trade network, linking China, the Middle East, and Europe. Under his rule, merchants traveled safely, cultures mixed, and knowledge spread faster than ever before. His legal code, the Yasa, enforced loyalty and discipline, punishing corruption and rewarding talent. And unlike Europe's rigid aristocracies, he promoted on merit, not birthright. If you were skilled, you rose through the ranks, no matter your origins. His empire became the first truly global economy, accelerating the spread of ideas, inventions, and even foods. But perhaps his most unexpected legacy, his bloodline. By the time of his death in 1227, Genghis Khan had fathered many children, but his legacy didn't stop there. His grandsons ruled vast empires. Kublai Khan became Emperor of China, founding the Yuan dynasty in 1271, while Hulagu Khan conquered Persia and Baghdad in 1258. Genetically, his impact was even more astonishing. A 2003 genetic study found that around 16 million men, 1 in every 200 worldwide, carry his Y chromosome. The reason? Mongol rulers took local wives, spreading his bloodline across Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. His dynasty shaped history long after his death. Genghis Khan didn't just change history, his bloodline still lives in it. History isn't just names in textbooks. It's a wild ride full of madmen, geniuses, and unexpected twists. Want more insane history stories? Subscribe now for weekly deep dives into the craziest moments in history. See you next week.